Hello. I'm going to show you some tricks about managing your user credentials, your login state in AWS on your local machine. And this is it's useful when you maybe use the AWS command line tools sometimes, but it will become more important now that we don't store the secrets like passwords and access keys in our code base anymore, but we want like to use your credentials, like the fact that we trust you. We want to use that to extract the secrets from our parameter store and decrypt them when needed. And so it becomes more important to have a bit of a grip on how you manage your credentials when you work with AWS. So let me just show you a few things. You might notice that here we're on a Mac. This is my home OS X MacBook Air. But this is it because we are talking um, command line stuff. It's mostly the same on Windows. Doesn't really matter much. If you have a text editor, you and you can just go for so I'll use Visual Studio Code here. Just go for so it's in my user folder. So this would be your user folder on Windows. So C users, your username, something like that, and then the folder is called .aws, and there will be a file there called credentials. All right, there it is. So if you don't have this file or you don't have that folder, you probably haven't ever installed the AWS command line tools. Now, it's not necessarily, I mean, you don't have to. You can just create that folder. You can create a .aws folder and make a credentials file, and you need a config file there as well, I think. But I would really suggest, just also for debugging purposes and all, to install those command line tools. It's a fairly small install. Just download it somewhere. Search for AWS command line tools, and that will help you set up these files as well. I'm assuming that you already have that, but if you don't, it's really not that hard. Now, you see that in this credentials file, I have two sets of credentials. There's my default set, and there is one that I have called Turnet snippets. So this is not the normal thing. I've set this up manually. What is normal is to have one set, and it would be called default, and you would typically set that up on the command line when you type AWS configure, and then it will ask you for keys. Well, if you don't have a key, you can create it with the console, like the web-based AWS console, and AWS configure will help you setting that up. I'm not going to change anything now, and that will write these settings that you just typed into the default thingy here. So that was our first use of the AWS command line tool. So anything you do in the command line, you start AWS, and then you use the commands are grouped like by service. So there is S3 commands, there's EC2 commands, there's IAM commands for users and groups and all of that. And basically everything you can do in the AWS console and more can be done with this command line tool. And the basic working of it is like this. You type AWS and then help, and will give you help about, what you can do. Sooner or later there will be a long list, like here's the list of services that you could use. Well, so this is a long list, EC2, Elasticache, stuff like that. Now, in this case, I want to show you the the command that I always use to check if my credentials are set up correctly, and this is part of IAM. So what you would typically say is AWS IAM, and then after that I'm again not completely sure, so I can say help again. So there's this help works sort of in a hierarchical fashion. You see, okay, so we're in IAM, which was one of the options that was shown before. Well, there's a lot of explaining again. And here are the commands, the IAM commands. So there's like add user to group. Um, actually, this is the one I want to use, get user. So it is shown here just in list, nothing more explanatory there. So if I want to know how to use that command, I use AWS IAM get user help. So now we get to the real call, the real explanation. You see, you say get user, and you get pass in a username, and if you have the proper rights, it will show you information about the user. But you can also see it's optional, and if it's not included, it says here it defaults to the user making the request. Now this is really useful, because if you are setting up your environment, what I always do is at some point I say AWS IAM get user, like that. And in this case, it shows your username is dev code access. So you can have a look at this in the console. You just log into the AWS console, go to IAM, to users, and you'll see that there is actually a dev code access user, and this is the user that we used to use in from our code, like in it would be in source control. We're removing that now, but for testing and for not having too much access, for having only limited access, this is pretty good. So I often use this as my default. But there are things that I cannot do now. So for example, okay, let's check it. So we have these new parameters, right? And like the secrets, we store them in the secret store. So I can do that on a command line as well. So I say AWS SSM, which is the simple systems management service, and I say get parameter. Now I don't quite remember how to do that. So to help, close it again. Oh yeah, I can say the name, and I can say with decryption, and then I get the details of the parameter. So let's try that. So I do dash dash name, and I know that the name of my parameter is dash dev dash core SQL connection string. Boom. Ah, there it is. So I apparently, with my default settings, I have enough privileges to make this call, and it shows me what the connection string is for the development environment. Well, that's nice. I would like to do the same thing for production. So production. I happen to know this name. There it is. So parameter secure string. It's just a secure string, and as you see, the value doesn't look at all like a connection string. That's because it's encrypted. But I happen to know that I can say dash dash with decryption. Now it says an error occurred. Access denied exception. The subject is basically you don't have access to the key to decrypt this. And that's because I am running as a dev user, something really generic with no admin rights or anything. Now, as you saw here, I have two sets of credentials here. There's the default one, but I also have the turn snippet one, which has more rights. So what you can do on a command line is say this works with all commands. I can say I want to use a specific profile. So profile turn at snippet. I should set up a region for my profile. Well, I can pass that right now. U-west-1. I should make this part of my profile. So here you see, okay, now I have access because I am a user with the right credentials, or like with the right privileges. I can also decrypt it, and I can I can very easily, by having these different sets of credentials in this file, can very easily switch between having a user that can do most of the things and is very safe, and I can never like accidentally destroy stuff, And if I want, I can switch to this Stoned snippet. Now, I have to figure out how to do it exactly, but what I would really like is that, like if we, for example, want to set up a proper set of privileges for certain servers, like if you want to know that a production server for the exercise builder, that it needs specific sets of privileges, you can also like test with that role. Like you can set either you just copy the credentials for that role into your default set for now, or you can, for example, set an environment variable that indicates which role you currently want to use, which profile you currently want to use, and then you just start the exercise builder locally, and it will use that set of credentials. So it's very it looks in the environment and at the context and decides with which credentials to call all those AWS services, and that's actually very powerful. So normally, what you would do is you use your own credentials as the default. You run locally, so you have sometimes you will maybe for development environments and test environments you will typically have enough credentials. Um, if you want to run the production environment locally, you would have to very explicitly do that. And if you have the right credentials or you can get them from someone, you can do that. It's all still possible. So, yeah, I hope that makes sense. And there's probably stuff that I've forgotten. There is some sort of weird file that is look it up in the Teams chat. Jeroen posted about it, and it is something about there are saved accounts, and you shouldn't really use that file. And there are many ways to set your credentials for AWS, but this is the way I like. So to have this credentials file with a set of profiles and setting up like an admin profile and a default profile, and sometimes, yeah, even more maybe. For example, I also, in reality, I also have a profile that gives me access to the sandbox environment. So you can set up a separate sandbox environment and say, yeah, now I want to do commands on the sandbox, and it will just go there. Okay, I hope that helps. See you later. Bye bye.